Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kristen Crampton Day, Executive Director of the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts. We are so excited to partner with Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund to bring you this webinar on federal arts policies and priorities, ArtsVote 2020, and what's on the horizon for arts advocacy in our country in Colorado. For those that don't know CBCA, our mission is to advance Colorado's creative economy by connecting business and the arts. As a statewide 501c3 nonprofit, we do this through advocacy, research, leadership, development, training, volunteerism, and arts engagement programs. In 2020, we are celebrating 35 years of facilitating and advancing arts and business partnerships in Colorado. In fact, this 35th anniversary milestone is at a time when our mission and our collective work as arts advocates is needed more than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on our creative sector, leaving scores of artists out of work, cultural organizations exhausting their reserves, and performance venues potentially shuttering for good. Layered in this is our societal reckoning with systemic racism and a politically fractured nation. That is the context for our ArtsVote this fall and the charge ahead for arts advocacy. Some Zoom housekeeping. Please stay muted and keep your cameras off. I encourage you to go to your video settings and select hide non-video participants or switch to the speaker view so you can focus on our presenters. Please use the chat feature to share comments and questions. Now I'll turn it over to Dustin Whistler to introduce your speaker. Dustin is principal at Forte Commercial Real Estate. He's CBCA's board vice chair and chair of CBCA's advocacy committee. Thank you, Dustin, and take it away.
Thank you, Kristen. It's truly a pleasure to serve on the CBCA board and to get to work with the bottomless pool of talent that we call the CBCA staff. And it's an honor to meet you, Nina, and to facilitate this conversation today. So our goal today is to provide some Colorado context on national issues ahead of the election. And many of you have already voted, which is great, but if for some reason you haven't voted yet, please do as soon as possible. So as a statewide collective of business leaders and cultural partners and arts advocates, it's important for us all to be informed on policies and priorities that impact the arts nationally and also in Colorado. The creative sector is what makes our state so vibrant. It's not only what we do with our ballots, but how do we support our creative community and as we look into the recovery in the coming months. I should note that CBCA is not taking a position on any legislation or candidate at this time. So Nina, we are so thrilled to have you today, and it's such a pleasure to meet you. Nina Ozlu Tunceli serves as both Chief Counsel and Government Affairs and Government and Public Affairs at Americans for the Arts. And as well, she is the Executive Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. For 27 years, Nina has served as the Chief Policy and Advocacy Strategist for Americans for the Arts. And in 2004, she became the founding Executive Director of the American for the Arts Action Fund, which is an affiliated 501c4 grassroots organization with a connected political action committee. And it's the only dedicated arts PAC in the country. Nina now mobilizes the political and legislative efforts of more than 450,000 citizen activist members in advancing arts policy issues and to legislators and candidates seeking federal public office. So Nina, I'll turn it over to you to share more about ArtsVote, and following your remarks, we'll visit further.
Thank you very much. If you could put up the first slide, Meredith, that would be great. As she does that, I want to do a shout out to one of our board members in Colorado, Deborah Jordy, for supporting Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund. It's a great honor to be doing this for Colorado. Hopefully next time I can do it in person. Okay, so you mentioned that I wear two hats, Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund. I wanted to say that how are they different so we can also let the audience know about the two differences. Americans for the Arts is a 501c3 nonprofit charity representing nationally representing local and community-based arts councils all across the country, statewide arts advocacy organizations, and all the state arts councils are actually members too, and regional arts councils, those that are helping to build community through the arts. And we have 5,000 organizational members of Americans for the Arts. And about 15 years ago, the Board of Americans for the Arts, as we were dealing with advocacy and legislative issues, these were the years where funding for the National Endowment for the Arts was on a trend of being terminated by a conservative group of members of Congress who were in control of the House at that time. And it was on a trail to be terminated in about 3 years. And so the Americans for the Arts Board said, look, we have to get ahead of this. We need to be engaging in political work with these candidates before they get elected instead of after they get elected. And so they created an affiliated organization called, and that's my dog barking if you can hear it, called Americans for the Arts Action Fund. And it is an official affiliated organization of Americans for the Arts, but it is incorporated as a 501c4 organization, which is a slightly different section of the IRS code that deals with organizations that have big grassroots memberships and that are dedicated to a social cause. In this case, our cause is advancing the arts and arts education in America. And what that allows us to do is two really important things, but it also takes away one thing. But the two very important things that it does is it allows us to spend 100% of our budget, if we so choose, on lobbying, whereas C3 organizations are limited on the amount of money that they can spend on lobbying. And there's a very kind of complex formula on how you get to how much they can spend. But I'm just going to, as a shorthand, say about 5% of your organization budget can be spent on lobbying, whereas we can spend up to 100%. We can also spend it on educational activities, of course, as well. And I'll be talking about one of them in a few minutes. We can also, though, spend up to 50%, or more specifically 49.99% of our budget on political activity, actually crossing the line and getting involved in election type activity, which is expressly prohibited for 501c3 charities to be able to do. So that gave us the opportunity to engage with candidates early on. It gave us an opportunity to create a separate fund for raising money to give to support pro-arts candidates, creating report cards and scorecards to grade legislators as they run as incumbents on how they did in their support for the arts. So it's become a very powerful tool, and we've already seen how helpful it's been in not only turning around this trend of terminating the national cultural agencies, but now doing regular increases year by year. The ultimate goal for us is to get a formula budget of $1 per capita of funding for the arts and $1 per capita of funding for the humanities. Right now, they're at about $162 million each, but with the population of the country, we think it should be at $328 million each. So just about double the size. And what's interesting is if we hadn't gone through those culture wars in the 80s and 90s, the NEA and NEH's budget, if it had been indexed to inflation from when it started, it would be at exactly $328 million each. So either way you look at it, that's where we should be, and that's the pocket we want to be in. And that's what we talk to candidates when we cross that line and move into the electoral activity. But for today, what I'm going to focus on is an educational civic activity that any 501c3 can participate in. And that's called our ArtsVote campaign. And specifically, it's ArtsVote, Make Your Vote Count. as a result of the pandemic, election laws have changed dramatically from state to state. And while you may live in a state and you're focused on how your state administers its elections, both the federal elections and the down ballot issues of governors and state legislators and city council people and mayors and education board members and ballot initiatives and tax ballot initiatives, all that's administered by your state. But if you can imagine it though, and for those of you who have lived in other states, you know this, that it varies from state to state how each state administers its election laws. Are they ones like Colorado that does everything by mail-in ballots? Or are they ones where you have to vote in person? Are they ones where they allow early voting or not allow early voting? And then as a result of the pandemic, so much has changed because now many more states have moved to the model that Colorado has set up with mail-in balloting, to quite a few more states now doing that. But then in other states, they just expanded the eligibility for absentee voting. Before, it's been a very narrow group of people who could do absentee ballot. You had to show that you were somehow infirm, you were over a certain age limit, or you were a college student and you had to show your student ID to prove that you had to be away from home. Very, very limited. But because of COVID-19, they've allowed that, let's call it excuse, to be able to use a mail-in absentee ballot because of fear of catching COVID-19 as a result of being clustered in long lines and big groups, or just you personally having it or something like that. It's broad enough that if 45 out of 50 states now are allowing expanded mail-in balloting. So thank you, first of all, Colorado, for being a model for other states. And you do it very well. But there have also been some additions and changes in Colorado, and I'd love to even share some of the findings that I found from your election board of how voting is going so far as of yesterday. I have the stats as of yesterday. But to first give you a sense of how your members and individuals can get on the bandwagon and show your support for voting this year. We've created these ArtsVote images that were actually designed as a donation by the famous artist Shepard Fairey. So these are Shepard Fairey's artworks. We asked him to focus on these themes, although he chose the exact wording because he's a master at connecting with the heart of what's going on today and the heart of artists and arts organizations. So he's the one who actually, we gave him ArtsVote. That's a trademark campaign of ours for many years. But he chose creative freedom, creative community, creative jobs, creative economy, because he knows it's more than an image. It's the words that also connect people and that drive a viral campaign. We also asked him to do it in Spanish this year. So we have both a Spanish version and an English version. So some of the things that we're going to show you, the English ones will be on the left and the Spanish ones will be on the right. So we have lots of different variations of this ad with these words and that flower image with the hand. Different shapes, sizes. You can use it as a backdrop like I'm doing for Zoom. You can have sizes for Facebook and Instagram. You can have sizes for Twitter. You can have different sizes for banners, buttons, everything you can imagine. We even have a shop to buy merchandise for this at redbubble.com. In any case, you can find all of this at artsactionfund.org/artsvote. But if you want to be able to download high pixel, high resolution ads in all of these sizes for you to manipulate for what your needs are, we ask you to take the pledge to make your vote count. And that's the link for the pledge. And all it is simply saying, you know, I am going to not only vote, I'm going to learn the rules that are unique to my state, which we provide, and I am going to do everything on the early side. Doesn't matter if the deadline is November 3rd, I'm going to do it on October 1st, or whatever the date is that you get this in your hands. Once you take that pledge and you hit submit, you'll receive an email that opens up the gallery of all Shepard Fairey's artwork for you to have with high resolution. So I encourage you all to do that. And then what you see below those two teal colored images is a navy blue one. And I've taken the liberty of adding CBCA's logo to this. And these are ads that we're going to be running in Facebook and Instagram until the end of the election to encourage everyone to make their vote count. So you'll see that we advertise the deadline for early voting in particular. And once that link, once you click on that link, which is the second link that we provide below, we will take you to, if you could go to the next screen, that would be great. Also, I have a message coming up on my screen that my speaker's not working, and to check the connection, could someone confirm whether you're hearing me okay?
I hear you fine.
Okay. I wish I could get rid of that image, that message, because it's blocking my view of the screen, but it is what it is. And thank you for confirming that you can hear me well. So we land, once you click on any of those Facebook ads, or if you put one of Shepard Fairey's images on your website, I encourage you all to click to make a hyperlink to this page, which is updated on a regular basis. You can see we just updated it yesterday too, because we got, thank you to Andy Vick, who's also on the call. He really encouraged us to change a little bit of the wording of step 2, so we did it. And so we have it up on the page, and we break it down into 4 easy steps. Now, a lot of times when you go to a voter registration page like iVote, Get Out the Vote, MTV's voter page, all these kinds of voter pages, what happens is you have to put in your zip code, and then it takes you to links, places that you need to go for sure, of, you know, registering to vote or something like that. But then you don't know what your next step is to take you to do the next thing. So what's nice about the one-pagers we've created, is that you see what your plan is that you need to make from beginning to end of what you need to do, and you can then decide when you take each step and how you're going to take it. It's like giving you the instructions to vote before you just dive into voting. Now, most of you have been voting for years, so you don't necessarily need this, but because deadlines changed and things and other kinds of things have changed, it's always good to get a refresher for you to review this. So I encourage you to do that. And step 4 is an easy one. If any of you heard President Obama speak at the Philadelphia event 2 days ago, he made this point, which we've been making since the start of our ArtsVote campaign, and that is, you need to promote and publicize the fact that you voted on your social media pages, because you want to make it cool. We want to make voting an act of coolness. We want people to be encouraged because they see their peers, they see their colleagues, they see their friends and family voting and getting it done early, that you are going to inspire them to go and do it and do the same. And we have this cool Shepard Fairey ArtsVote artwork that you can do with the postings that you make after you take the pledge to vote, after you mail in your ballots to vote, or if you choose to go in for early voting. I know in Colorado, it's almost all mail-in balloting, but you do have some early voting days as well. If we go to the next screen. Thank you. Here's 2 other versions of the Shepard Fairey artwork in the navy blue and a little bit of the teal. So you can, continues to give you different variations of it, the English on the left and the Spanish on the right. Again, to just kind of review the key things, I guess on October 9th, since I'm not there, I base it on your state election site's website, that on October 9th, the ballots were mailed to all pre-registered voters, but you can register to vote all the way up until October 26th. So they'll just mail those ballots after you register, but don't cut it so close. I mean, if you're registering by October 26th, you don't want to rely on the mail to have that ballot sent to you and then for you to return it by November 3rd. No, you don't want to do that. That's why you want to do everything on the early side. I've been doing these webinars in a different state. I feel like I am traveling to a different state every day. Yesterday I was in Florida, today in Colorado, before that New York, New Jersey. I say the same thing, and I'm hearing the same thing. And there really are postal problems going on. And I don't know if it's specifically happening in Colorado, but almost in every state that I've been talking to, everybody's talking about postal problems, postal problems, postal problems. As an example, my daughter, we live in Northern Virginia, and she goes to school at the University of Southern California in California. And she requested the mail-in ballot, and we could see, because you can, just like in Colorado, you can track where your ballot is, when did they send it, when did you return it, when did they receive it. It's all tracked. And it had been almost 4 weeks and she still hadn't received it. And finally, just 2 days ago, she got it. So it took 4 weeks for the mail to get from Virginia to Los Angeles. That's just ridiculous. So I had her spend the money to send it FedEx as a return, just so that she could make her vote count. And then the one other thing that I picked up from your website is, and you guys can confirm if this is true, but if you don't actually return your mailed ballot by October 26, you have to go and pick up your ballots at the polling station and drop them off there as well, as I understand, to make sure it's counted in time. The other piece that you'll see, I added a little photo capture from a tweet from your Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold. She just recently tweeted this, and I'm not sure if everyone knows about it, is that one of the biggest problems with mail-in balloting, maybe it's not as big of a deal in Colorado because you've been doing it so long, but in other states, their signatures for when they originally registered might be when they were 18 years old getting their driver's license. And so as a 50-year-old, your signature does not necessarily match your 18-year-old signature. So in Colorado, they've done something really cool that I have not seen yet in other states. And she said that if you need to correct your signature discrepancy of what is on record of what your signature looks like base, and then compared with what you mail in as your executed ballot for this year, if there's a discrepancy, they will not count your ballot. So they are offering an opportunity for you to text the number 2, cure your signature, and you can do it all through your telephone. It's quite amazing. I don't know how it's worked. I would love to know in the chat room if anyone's had to use it and if it worked. Take a moment to see if anyone posts anything.
And while we're waiting for that, just to clarify that, and on the 26th, if you register, I think after the 26th, then you have to go get your ballot.
Yeah.
Right there. If you've already registered and you receive a ballot, you can return it at any time to a polling place, or we also have boxes where you can vote, drop off your vote, or they'll set up a tent out in front of the city and county buildings that receive the vote.
And I see in the chat, I have a chance to look at the chat right now. Jennifer brought up that the graphic says it's the last day to vote on November 2nd. No, it's focused on the last day for early voting is November 2nd. Okay, so now if we could go to the next slide, Meredith. Okay, so this is directly from your Secretary of State's website. And I thought it was really interesting. I've been reviewing this for a lot of states and a lot of local communities and their specific counties of how voting is going. So I thought I'd just kind of give you a heads up, less than 2 weeks before the election, how things are looking. According to your Secretary of State, This is as of yesterday. So the total pool of registrants. Now you can still have late registration in Colorado, so that number can go up. Whereas for instance, I was just speaking in Florida yesterday, their registration date was October 6th with no opportunity for late registration. So that pool of registrants will not change in Florida, where it's a dynamic number in Colorado, right up until the day of the election. So of the total number of registrants so far, you have about 3.7 million. I'm not going to go through the smaller numbers, 3.7 million. So I think it's interesting to see how that's broken up. So what is interesting is in Colorado, how many unaffiliated registered voters there are. I will share that as a comparison. That is not your typical scenario that you would see in other states. You would see them possibly being even, Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated, or people having party registration higher than unaffiliated. But in Colorado, the unaffiliated actually have the highest registration count. So 1.5 million, Republicans about 1 million, and Democrats at 1.1 million. And those percentages to the right are kind of giving you an indication of the total pool of registrants. What does that represent? So almost 41% of all registrants are unaffiliated. And then when you scroll down and look at total ballots cast, which is really interesting, out of the 3.7 million registered voters, a third of all ballots have already been cast in Colorado. And here's the breakdown. 508,000 of them are Democrats, and that represents 39.6% of all ballots cast so far are Democrats. Among Republicans, it's 317,000, and that represents 24.77% of all ballots cast so far. And unaffiliated, they represent 34.5%. So almost even with Democrats of the total number of ballots cast. But because it's close to even, the insight here is that Democrats are really coming out much earlier and in larger numbers during this early voting period, because while they have fewer registrants by about 400,000 to unaffiliated, they're about even in terms of total ballots cast. Actually, Democrats are outperforming with 39% of total ballots cast. That's interesting. I think another thing is interesting that you can find from the graph that the Colorado Secretary of State puts out is the line graph on the lower left side. With only 13 days out from the election, it looks like that Colorado voter turnout is 130% higher among Democrats so far and 58% higher than Republicans. Now, a couple of things on that. I'm sure many of you watched the debates and the spin rooms after the debates. And what I heard from a lot of Republican spin doctors is that their constituency of registered Republicans tend to vote on the day of election. So this is not necessary. They don't think that these numbers that are out there, because this is kind of very similar scenario, I will say, in a lot of states, especially battleground states. I'm seeing a lot of the very similar things where Democrats are really outpacing Republicans in early voting stage. But definitely Republicans feel like they tend to vote on election day. So things could change and this might be misleading. It doesn't matter for me in terms of which way it's going. I'm just stating the facts of what I'm seeing and analyzing the data. I would also add, in terms of signatures that we talked about just a moment ago, one of the other things that the Republican spin doctors, specifically Reince Priebus, which was Donald Trump's first chief of staff and really helped him on his election campaign in 2016. He said, depending on the outcome of the election, he thinks that the number one thing that the Trump campaign is going to be taking to the court system and literally suing various different states about is challenging them on signature matches. And that could really take a long time to resolve the election if something like that happens. So I love that your Secretary of State has created this phone app of Text to Cure to fix signatures, because their hand has been shown. The Trump campaign has said that they are going out and they're going to be challenging signature matches. That's going to be the #1 thing they're looking at. So please let your constituents know through these kinds of webinars and otherwise, make sure your signatures match. I think I'll pause here.
Thank you, Nina. So we have a few questions to start off with, and I'd
And you can
encourage
take the
everybody.
slide down. Thank you.
I'd encourage everybody to chime in the chat room with your questions. But I'll start out with this. As you think about, thinking about the pandemic and the recession and the impact on the arts, the stakes are super high. So what can a voter do now or on election day or over the next few months to contribute to the best outcomes for the cultural sector?
Yeah. So anytime you have an opportunity to be at a town hall meeting, a phone Zoom call, a telephone conference call with candidates who want to get elected now, and you as an individual citizen and a voter, you can go and participate. And what I want everyone to do is stop being shy about asking a question. I want us to bring out our theatrical skills and stand up for the arts and ask a question about what that candidate's position, whether it's a local, state, or federal position, what that person's position is on the arts, with a little prelude sentence about how the arts make a difference in your community.
That's perfect. Yeah, just talking about community vitality and impact on innovation, et cetera. Okay, so let's turn a little bit to policy issues. So it appears that that the major agenda for the arts sits with the next Congress, almost certainly. So appropriations for the NEA, put creatives to work, save our stages, and the future CARES Act, all that is in the future. What is your impression of our Colorado delegation on these fronts?
So just 2 days ago, we released something called the Congressional Arts Report Card. Let me take a look at Colorado. Okay, so I'm just going to go.
Nice list, I guess.
Well, we'll see. We consider ABC passing grades and a pro arts vote and eligible to receive an Arts Action Fund PAC support, financial support to a candidate's campaign. Eligible, not necessarily, it's not granted, but it's eligible. So Diane DeGette got a B, so that's great. Joe Naguse, a B. So Scott Lipton he lost his primary election, so I'm not sure who your new candidates which would become an open seat at this point, would be. And then Ken Buck is your sole member of Congress who got a solid F from us because he's voted against pretty much everything and not participated in anything that supports the arts. And our criteria it can be basic things like being a member of the Congressional Arts Caucus, a member of the Congressional STEAM Caucus, Humanities Caucus, signing on to a Dear Colleague letter with other members of Congress to ask for increased funding for the arts. It could be voting for an appropriations bill on the floor that's been voted and supportively voted out of committee by his own colleagues to support the arts. These are the criteria. It's not like really esoteric stuff. Doug Lamborn got a D, but it's because one of the things that prevented it from getting an F is that he did actually vote for an appropriations bill on the floor. So we're grateful for that, but there were 10 criteria and he did one of the 10. So he got a D. And then Jason Crow and Ed Perlmutter both got B. So I think that's pretty good. But what's nice about this report card, and I saw someone put in a link for it, is that this is just the beginning. This is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning of the discussion. So when you all have your opportunities to meet with your member of Congress, or you're at one of these town hall meetings with one of these members, you could say, you know, I understand you only got a B on the Congressional Arts Report Card this year. And I see that you aren't a member of the Congressional Arts Caucus or the Humanities Caucus or the STEAM Caucus. Would you consider being a member? Let's get your grade higher, represent Colorado better, something like that. And in terms of the Senate, Michael Bennett got, because there was no floor vote, we don't give letter grades in the Senate because we don't think it's fair. There are more simpler indicators as opposed to a hardcore floor vote. So we do a thumbs up or not, or no thumbs up at all. So for Michael Bennett, he got a thumbs up, and I can tell you he's a great senator on arts policy issues. I will also tell you that Cory Gardner did not get a thumbs up. So, and I know he's up for election, but those are the facts. I don't make them up.
I used my CBCA scorecard to write down the scorecard.
Okay.
Okay, so do we have any other questions, Meredith, up there? Okay.
I would like to, I would love, I think Jennifer still would love some adjustments to the ad that we have out. We have our ads are very dynamic and flexible. So if there's something to improve the language of the ad, please add it to the chat room, and I will heavily consider it, and we can change our Facebook ads in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So actually, one thing I'd like to go back into is some of these policies, like put creatives to work and save our stages and the appropriations for NAA, the CARES Act. Do you have any updates you can share with us around any of those?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'm happy to. So CARES Act, both the first one and the second one, and amendments that came after those, they have been game changers to save the arts and culture community, both the for-profit, the nonprofit, and individual gig workers. Absolutely a game changer. And one of the key things that I like to articulate to members of Congress is that gig workers, for the first time ever, were recognized as a small business, and at the same time, they were recognized as being eligible for unemployment compensation. That's neither one of those have been done before, and the fact that both of them happened at the same time literally is saving our industry, because because a nonprofit arts organization is nothing without artists, a for-profit commercial arts company is nothing without artists. It starts with artists. And the fact that we could save our artists this way is a very big deal, but it's not enough, because we know the extra pandemic unemployment compensation ended at the end of July. We know that PPP loans were only for 2.5 months, and that started back in April. So we know it's not enough, and it has to be extended. This is true for many, many industries, and we're part of it. And what's important to know is that our lobbying is effective in making sure we're part of that national extension. So in terms where we're at, I think we've all been seeing the headlines of Nancy Pelosi and Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin trying to negotiate the next deal. But there are problems that while they agree on the total amount of money, which is quite good, $2.2 trillion, where they don't agree on is on how the money is used. And I'd say there are 3 primary areas that are the conflict areas. One is a child credit, tax credit, to be able to, if people want people to get back to work and schools are closed, they need an ability to hire someone else to watch their kids because they're at home. So that child tax credit is part of the formula for economic recovery. The Democrats want that. Second is a employee retention tax credit to prevent employers, to encourage, I would say, with incentives, to encourage employers to keep retaining their employees and not laying them off. Again, that's something that the House Democrats want, that the Republicans don't want. And then a third item is, although I think that they've come to an agreement on that one I think got reconciled. But the third, probably biggest one is the House Democrats want more funding to go to state and local governments to be able to help retain their employees too, because there are major treasury deficits happening that we're going to begin seeing in the beginning of the year, especially of there's just not enough tax being created as a result of sales and employee taxes and all that kind of stuff for all of the staff and employees of federal and state, no, pardon me, of this case, state and local governments to be retained, to provide services and so they want to create more CARES block grants. And that is probably the thing that has the sharpest derision between the two parties. Add to that, even if Mnuchin and Pelosi can come to agreement, which I think probably has already even happened, we have Senate-controlled Republicans under Mitch McConnell who specifically said that he does not want to do another CARES package because he doesn't want the money to go to state and local governments primarily. He also wants it to be something that is closer to $500 billion as opposed to $2.2 trillion. And I think what kind of inside industry people know is he doesn't want this huge deficit package to happen under a Republican administration. So it's not credited to Republicans for having such a huge deficit. These are kind of the games, unfortunately, that are being played at the expense of people's lives. And we are certainly making that point to push as hard as possible to have these second round of PPP loans, having an extension of pandemic unemployment, having specific grants go through again, probably more than twice the size of last time, funding for National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities above and beyond their annual appropriations. And then you also mentioned Save Our Stages. That one, we, on the first round of that legislation, absolutely 100% for it because it's about independent venues that were also eligible for nonprofits, not just commercial, to protect and keep those venues open. But something has changed that got tweaked and we're kind of upset with this Save Our Stages. And we're trying to find out if this is intentional or unintentional. And here's the issue. And if there's anyone associated with that program, please contact your national folks who are working on this. And that's this. Something's been added to Save Our Stages that only make eligibility for those who make 90% or more of their gross revenue from ticket sales. Now, you have to think through this to realize why this would hurt nonprofits that have venues, because nonprofits are charities that also get donations to help lower ticket sales, increase artistic quality and things like that. So
arts education.
Yes, all arts education, all those kinds of things. So if you looked at a nonprofit organization that has a venue and their gross income, about 40% of it is coming from donated charitable income. So they would automatically become ineligible for a $10 billion fund of Save Our Stages. So we're upset by this. We want to protect the nonprofits. And I think this is unintentional. I think that what they were trying to do is eliminate large corporations that have multiple venues. I think that's what their goal was, and I don't think that they realized that it actually is hurting the nonprofits.
Yeah. Actually, that points to a question in the chat room. Matt Chizansky was asking about, is advocating for federal action at a local level effective? So maybe you could use that to take it a step further. So Senator Bennett was a promoter of Save Our Stages legislation. And so what would we do, for instance, with him, and would that be effective for advocating locally for federal action?
Yeah, so we definitely, yes, Senator Bennett was there. And I have to tell you, I also do a lot of Zoom fundraiser events with members of Congress. Every single one of the members that I've told about this, their jaw drops to the ground and they don't realize that this has been added at the last minute to a bill that's probably not going anywhere, but at the moment, but it will go somewhere eventually once the politics is done. And they're writing down very quickly my points because they don't realize that this is in there, and they under no circumstance want to see nonprofits ineligible for this fund. So what I would tell Matt and others is let Senator Bennett know about this problem. And if you want to follow up with more details, Matt knows my email. He can email me directly, and I'll get you in touch with our federal affairs team to get you all the right language.
Thank you. I guess one more quick question. We only have a couple of minutes, but maybe we can dig in a little bit on here. So Colorado Creative Industries recently did a study which included the impacts of the pandemic on the state's creative sector. And that data paints a pretty dire picture, especially for workers in the music industry, which you pointed to, venues, fine arts, including dance, theater, performing arts, visual artists. So is this sort of impact, do you see this as consistent around the country, or is it more, is it deeper in Colorado than around the country?
What was the number for artist unemployment? Is that one of the numbers you tracked?
You know what? I don't have that right in front of me, so okay. I can't tell you that.
So what we are tracking it at a national level too, and we take into consideration the details that you're doing at a state and local level all across the country. And what our numbers show, and it is consistent, there's nothing unique going on in Colorado, is that while unemployment at a national level is 10-11%, unemployment among gig workers in the arts and culture is 62%. Yeah, that's the other number that I give these members of Congress on these fundraiser calls. I give them that one, and they're like, "Oh," they go like this. "Oh my God."
Yeah, and it's not the wealthy that are employed in this case, right? In the creative sector.
Yeah. So so there's that. And we're looking at numbers. I think it's somewhere in the range of almost 240 million, essentially admission ticket sales opportunities that have been lost because of closures. Billions and billions of dollars of lost earned revenue. Now, on a little bit on the positive side, and I'd love to know if this is happening in Colorado, some early research that gives in real time the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and that's for all charities, not unique to the arts. They showed that there was a donation increase more than anticipated in these last 2 quarters in 2020 during the pandemic for charities in general. We matched that up with our indicators of funds going to arts organizations, and it matched up pretty similarly. And it would be interesting to know if cultural organizations in Colorado also saw at least not a reduction in donated income in 2020.
I may get the hook here, and please do so, Kristen or Meredith or Rachel, if you need to, but are there some examples around the country where, or what are the best examples of actions being taken by states or state or local governments around the country? Do you have any best practice for us to think about here?
Yeah, I don't know if it's happened yet in Colorado. It most likely has, but states And local governments are finally working through their large CARES block grant funds that they got originally back in March. And they first worked through buying enough PPE, helping hospitals, first responders, a whole series of things that were related directly to COVID-19 and medical issues. But the legislation was written broadly enough, and the amount of money that was given to state and local governments as block grants was ample enough that after they spent the money on those first level things, there's now money left over to support economic recovery efforts in all aspects of government. And since June, I will say, and every day since middle of June, I would say, is a new report of the state government giving out, the common number I see is $10 million to their state arts agency in CARES Act block grant above and beyond their annual appropriations to support cultural organizations. Another version will be economic relief grants given to all forms of businesses, which can include nonprofits and gig workers. Variations of those are happening across the country. Today, Massachusetts came out with $10 million for the Massachusetts Cultural Council to give out in donations. Yesterday, it was Connecticut, but theirs was in the form of economic grants to all kinds of businesses, including the arts. It didn't go through the Arts Council. And then it's also happening at the local level. From Miami to Los Angeles to San Francisco, they're using the balance of their CARES Act block grant money to help support the arts in addition to other industries. I'm sure it's happening probably in Colorado. I don't have the details, but that's something you should be looking at both city, county, and state level. They all got a piece of the pie. And the key here is they all have to obligate the funds before December 31st of this year. Otherwise, they have to return the funds. And that's why we're seeing a big rush in this last quarter of these state and local governments distributing and obligating their funds to a different agency to re-grant out.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time with us and visiting with our community here. And I guess I'll hand it off to Kristen to just close us out. But thanks so much, Nina.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Dustin, for facilitating, and thank you, Nina, for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today. We are so grateful to you and the Arts Action Fund for everything that you do. I want to put out a reminder to everyone that membership to the Arts Action Fund is free. So they have lots of great resources and opportunities for you to be better educated and to take action. So do sign up. I think Meredith will put that in the chat so you have an easy link. And let's make sure that Colorado's voice is heard on behalf of the arts. I also want to thank Matt Shazansky for his role in helping to organize this webinar today. Thank you, Matt. Also to my team members, Meredith Badler and Rachel Henney, for helping to orchestrate things. CBCA has an advocacy section on our website, including an ever-evolving page with updates and opportunities for action, the collaborative campaign, Arts Through It All, as well as we've launched a new Colorado Cultural Champions Network, where we're currently welcoming business and civic leaders statewide to be a part of this network as arts advocates. The application is on our website. Please share it broadly. We would appreciate that. And finally, we invite you to celebrate CBCA's 35 years of arts and business partnerships with our 80s themed mixtape celebration all through the first 3 weeks of November, on November 5th, 12th, and 19th. And also, Meredith, if you can put a link in the chat for our 35th anniversary events, we would love to see you there. These events are also free, and we just want you to join us in celebrating this milestone for this organization. And finally, please remember to vote if you haven't already. It was good to see the early ballot numbers that you shared earlier, Nina, that we are getting out there with the vote already, but if you haven't, please make sure you do. And back to what Nina was sharing earlier, what we can do to help encourage others to vote. So again, thank you for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day and your weekend, and pray for some snow in Colorado so we can put out these wildfires, and have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you again, Nina.
Hi, thank you.